Chapter 1, The Unanswered Question. Have you ever felt that lingering sense of déjà vu, as if you were on the brink of remembering something important, something that could change everything? Amelia Harper knew that feeling well. For as long as she could remember, there was a question buried deep within her that she couldn't quite put her finger on, a sense that she was forgetting something vital, something that mattered. But what? Maplewood was a quiet town, nestled between rolling hills and surrounded by dense forests, where everyone knew each other's business. Or, at least, they thought they did. For Amelia, it was a place where the past seemed to hang in the air, heavy and unspoken. She had lived here her whole life, working at the town's dusty library, a relic from a bygone era. The library was a place where time seemed to stand still, with old books lined up like forgotten soldiers waiting for someone to uncover their stories. It was a rainy Wednesday afternoon when she found the letter. The rain wasn't heavy, but it was persistent, tapping rhythmically against the windows and creating a soft, hypnotic background noise. Amelia was in her usual spot behind the checkout desk, sorting through a stack of returned books, when she noticed a yellowed piece of paper tucked inside one of them. She almost missed it, mistaking it for just another scrap of paper. But something about it caught her eye, the careful, deliberate handwriting. "Meet me at the old oak tree by the lake at midnight. I promise, everything will change." The words struck a chord deep within her. She didn't know why, but they felt oddly familiar. She turned the letter over in her hands, searching for a name, a date, something to explain its presence. But there was nothing. No signature, no address, just a cryptic message that seemed to be waiting for her to find it, the oak tree by the lake. That was a place she hadn't thought about in years. A sense of nostalgia mixed with a twinge of unease washed over her. Why did this letter feel like it was meant for her? Who wrote it, and why? The questions tugged at her mind, refusing to let go. She spent the rest of the day distracted, her thoughts constantly drifting back to the letter. When the library closed and she walked home under the dull gray sky, the feeling only grew stronger. It was as if the letter had awakened something inside her, a dormant memory struggling to resurface. Chapter 2, The Pull of Curiosity. By the time Amelia arrived home, she had made up her mind. She would go to the lake. She needed to see if there was something waiting for her there, some clue to explain the unsettling feeling in her chest. Maybe it was nothing more than an old note forgotten in a book. But what if it wasn't? The next night, she found herself walking the narrow, winding path that led to the lake. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. She pulled her coat tighter around her, her footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. The path was overgrown, the tall grass brushing against her legs. As she approached the lake, the old oak tree came into view, its gnarled branches reaching out like ancient arms. She checked her watch, 11:55 p.m. She was early, but she didn't mind. The stillness of the night was calming, even as her heart raced with anticipation. She stood by the base of the tree, feeling the rough bark under her fingers, and listened to the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. Minutes passed, and she began to wonder if this had all been a mistake. But then, just as the clock struck midnight, she heard footsteps approaching from behind. She turned around, her breath catching in her throat. A man was walking toward her, his silhouette dark against the moonlit path. As he came closer, she could make out his features, a tall man in his early 30s with dark hair and a lean build. He wore a long coat, and his expression was a mix of cautious hope and uncertainty. "You came," he said softly, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Amelia felt a jolt of recognition, though she couldn't place him. There was something familiar about his face, his voice. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady but curious. "My name is Daniel Prescott," he replied, taking a step closer. "And you don't remember me, do you?" Chapter 3, The Forgotten Connection. Daniel. The name sounded faintly familiar, like a whisper from a dream. Amelia shook her head, trying to clear the fog in her mind. "I'm sorry, I don't remember," she said slowly. Daniel's expression softened, a look of disappointment crossing his face. "I didn't expect you to. It's been a long time. But we knew each other once, Amelia. When we were kids." Amelia's brow furrowed. "How do you know my name?" "We were best friends," he continued, his voice filled with a mix of sadness and longing. "We grew up together, here in Maplewood. But then, something happened. Something that made us forget." "Forget what?" she asked, her heart beating faster. What are you talking about? Daniel looked at her, his eyes searching hers as if trying to find the answer to a question he'd been asking for years. We made a promise, right here at this tree. A promise that if we ever lost each other, we'd come back here. To find our way back. Amelia stared at him, the words resonating deep within her, stirring something she couldn't quite grasp. But I don't remember any of this. Why? Daniel sighed, a heavy sound filled with years of pent-up frustration. Because they made us forget. Your parents. My parents. They thought it would be safer that way. For you, and for me. Chapter 4, The unraveling begins. The following days were a blur of confusion and relentless curiosity. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel was telling the truth. But how could she have forgotten an entire friendship, a whole chapter of her life? She needed answers. She started her search at the town library, digging through old records, photographs, and yearbooks. She found no mention of Daniel Prescott, no birth certificates, no school records, nothing. It was as if he had never existed. Frustrated and more determined than ever, she turned to her parents, hoping they might have the answers she was looking for. "Mom, do you remember a boy named Daniel Prescott?" she asked one evening at dinner. Her mother's face went pale, and she exchanged a quick, nervous glance with her father. "Why are you asking about him?" she replied, her voice tight and controlled. "I met him the other night," Amelia said, watching her mother's reaction closely. "He said we knew each other when we were kids. But I don't remember him." Her mother's eyes narrowed. "And you shouldn't. We made sure of that." Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. "What do you mean?" Her father spoke up, his voice firm but laced with an edge of fear. "It's for the best, Amelia. Leave it alone." But that only made her more determined. What were they hiding? What were they so afraid of? Chapter 5, Confrontation and Confession. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Amelia arranged to meet Daniel again. They met under the cover of darkness at the old oak tree. This time, she was ready for answers. "I spoke to my parents," she began. "They told me to forget you, that they made sure I did." "Why? What are they hiding?" Daniel nodded, as if he had expected this. "They didn't want you to remember the truth. About me. About what happened." "Then tell me," Amelia insisted. "I need to know." Daniel hesitated, his face filled with a mix of pain and determination. "There was an accident. A fire. My father died, and I was blamed for it. I had to leave. To disappear. Your parents thought it was best if you forgot everything, if you never knew." Amelia's heart sank. "But why come back now?" "Because there are things I need to know too," Daniel said quietly. "Things that don't add up. And I need your help to figure them out." Chapter 6, The Darker Side of Maplewood. With her curiosity now fully awakened and her determination burning brighter, Amelia agreed to help Daniel. Together, they began to dig deeper into the events surrounding the fire and Daniel's father's death. As they pieced together fragments of the past, they started to uncover secrets hidden beneath the surface of Maplewood. They discovered that Daniel's father had been involved in shady dealings with powerful figures in the town, illegal activities that had been covered up for years. The fire was no accident, it was a cover-up, an arson meant to silence him before he could expose the truth. As they got closer to uncovering the full story, they started to attract unwanted attention. Amelia began receiving threatening notes, her tires were slashed, and she noticed a black car parked outside her house more often than not. It was clear someone wanted to keep the past buried. One night, as they were combing through some old documents in the library, two men showed up, blocking the exit. "You've been asking too many questions," one of them said, his voice cold. "It's time to stop." Daniel stepped forward, shielding Amelia. "We're not stopping until we know what happened to my father." The other man sneered, pulling out a gun. "You've been warned." Amelia's heart pounded in her chest, fear coursing through her veins. "We'll stop," she said quickly, trying to defuse the situation. "Just, let us go." The men exchanged a glance, then nodded. "Smart choice. Make sure it stays that way." Chapter 7, A Ray of Hope. Despite the threats, Amelia and Daniel continued their investigation, more cautiously than before. They were convinced they were on the verge of a breakthrough, and they were right. They found a hidden letter, written by Daniel's father just before the fire. It was addressed to Amelia's parents, revealing his plan to turn himself in and expose the corruption in Maplewood. But someone had found out and decided to silence him. Armed with this evidence, they confronted one of the men who had threatened them, recording the entire conversation. Under pressure, he confessed to everything: the conspiracy, the arson, the threats. The truth, once uncovered, spread like wildfire. The town was rocked by scandal as the guilty parties were arrested and brought to justice. Chapter 8, New Beginnings and Old Scars. With the truth finally out, Daniel's name was cleared, and the weight that had been on his shoulders for so many years was lifted. Amelia, too, felt a sense of closure. She had found the answers to the questions that had haunted her for so long, and in doing so, she had rediscovered a part of herself that she hadn't realized was missing. As they stood together beneath the old oak tree one last time, Daniel turned to her with a smile. "Thank you, Amelia. For believing in me. For helping me." Amelia smiled back. "We made good on that promise, didn't we?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, we did. And now, maybe, it's time to start making some new ones." And with that, they walked away from the past, ready to face whatever the future held, together. Chapter 9, Echoes of the Past. In the weeks following the revelations that shook Maplewood, life in the small town began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The arrests and the trials that followed brought a sense of justice and closure, but they also left scars that wouldn't heal overnight. For Amelia and Daniel, their worlds had been turned upside down, and they were left to navigate the aftermath. Amelia returned to her routine at the library, but she found it hard to focus. The old walls and familiar smell of dust and aging paper that once brought her comfort now felt stifling. Every corner seemed to whisper secrets she hadn't uncovered yet, every shadow seemed to hide another mystery. The library had been her sanctuary, but now it felt like a prison of unanswered questions. Daniel, meanwhile, tried to piece together a life that had been lost to time. His name was cleared, but his reputation still hung in the balance. Some in the town looked at him with suspicion, their eyes narrow with judgment, while others saw him as a hero who had exposed the darkness hidden in plain sight. He wasn't sure where he belonged anymore. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by the library, his hands in his coat pockets, his eyes searching for something, someone. Amelia looked up from the circulation desk, her eyes meeting his, and she could see the weariness etched into his face. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Got a minute?" "Of course," Amelia replied, setting aside the book she'd been pretending to read. She gestured to the quiet corner by the window where they had often talked, and they sat down facing each other. "I've been thinking a lot," Daniel began, his gaze distant. "About everything that happened. About what comes next." Amelia nodded, sensing where this was going. "It's hard to just go back to normal, isn't it?" He chuckled, a humorless sound. "Yeah, if there even is a normal anymore. But more than that. I've been thinking about my father. About what he tried to do. He wanted to make things right, and he paid the price for it." "You did that," Amelia said gently. "You finished what he started." "But it's not enough," Daniel said, his voice filled with conviction. "There's still so much that's broken here. The town, the people. It's like we're all stuck in the past, afraid to move forward." Amelia listened, her heart aching for him. She understood what he meant. Maplewood was a town that clung to its history, even when that history was filled with pain. "What are you thinking?" she asked, knowing he had something in mind. "I'm thinking of leaving," he said finally, his eyes locking onto hers. "Not forever, but, just for a while. I need to figure out who I am outside of this place. Without all the ghosts." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Amelia felt a pang in her chest, a mix of sadness and understanding. "I get it," she said softly. "Sometimes you have to leave to find yourself. But I don't want to leave you," Daniel added quickly, his voice filled with earnestness. "You've been my anchor through all of this. I want you to come with me." Chapter 10, Crossroads. Amelia was caught off guard. She hadn't expected him to say that. The idea of leaving Maplewood had never occurred to her. This was her home, the only place she'd ever known. But as she looked into Daniel's eyes, she realized that maybe, just maybe, her home wasn't a place. Maybe it was a person. "What would we do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Whatever we want," Daniel replied with a small smile. "We could travel, see new places, start fresh. We don't have to be defined by what happened here." Amelia felt a flicker of excitement mixed with fear. Could she really just leave? She thought of her parents, of the life she had built, as simple and unremarkable as it was. She had always been the girl who played it safe, who never took risks. But Daniel had awakened something in her, a desire to break free, to be more than the sum of her fears. "I need some time to think," she said finally, her heart pounding in her chest. "Of course," Daniel said, nodding. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere without you." As Daniel left the library, Amelia sat back in her chair, staring out the window at the familiar streets of Maplewood. She knew she had a decision to make, one that could change everything. The old oak tree, the secrets they had uncovered, the danger they had faced together, it had all led to this moment. What did she really want? Chapter 11, the decision. Over the next few days, Amelia wrestled with her decision. She visited the places that had been her life's backdrop, the quiet streets, the little bakery where she bought her bread, the park where she used to play as a child. She watched the people, her neighbors, going about their lives, and she wondered what it would be like to leave it all behind. Her parents noticed her restlessness. "You've been quiet lately," her mother said one evening, her eyes sharp with concern. Amelia hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Daniel wants to leave town for a while. He asked me to go with him." Her mother's face tightened. "And what did you say?" "I haven't given him an answer yet," Amelia replied. "But I'm thinking about it." Her mother's lips thinned, and her father looked up from his newspaper, his expression unreadable. "You've been through a lot, Amelia," her father said carefully. "Maybe a fresh start would be good for you." Amelia was surprised. She had expected resistance, not support. Her mother, however, wasn't as understanding. "This is your home," she said sharply. "You belong here." "Do I?" Amelia asked, feeling a swell of emotion. "Or do I just belong to the past?" Her mother's face softened, and she looked away. "You've always been a good daughter," she said quietly. "But if you think leaving is what you need to find yourself, then, maybe it's time." That night, Amelia lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She had spent so long trying to uncover the past that she hadn't thought about what she wanted for the future. But now she knew. The next morning, she met Daniel at the old oak tree, the place where their journey had begun. His face was tense with anticipation, but his eyes softened when he saw her. "I'm coming with you," she said, her voice steady. "Let's start fresh." A smile broke across Daniel's face, and for the first time in a long while, Amelia felt truly free. Chapter 12, the road ahead. Leaving Maplewood was harder than Amelia imagined. As she packed her bags, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and sorrow. This town had been her whole world, but now it was time to step beyond its borders and see what else life had to offer. On the day of their departure, a small crowd gathered to see them off. Amelia hugged her parents, who gave her words of encouragement and tearful goodbyes. Her mother's eyes were filled with a mix of pride and worry, but there was also something else, acceptance. "You take care of yourself, okay?" her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "And call us when you get there." "I will," Amelia promised, feeling the weight of the moment. As she and Daniel climbed into his old pickup truck, she took one last look at the town she had called home for so long. There were tears in her eyes, but there was also a smile on her face. She was ready. They drove for hours, the landscape changing from familiar hills and forests to open highways and sprawling fields. The further they got from Maplewood, the lighter Amelia felt. She was leaving behind more than just a town, she was leaving behind a version of herself she no longer wanted to be. "Where to first?" Daniel asked, glancing over at her. "Anywhere," Amelia replied with a grin. "Everywhere. Let's see it all." And so they did. They traveled to bustling cities and quiet villages, from snow-covered mountains to sunlit beaches. They met new people, faced new challenges, and found new parts of themselves they never knew existed. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. Chapter 13, New Discoveries. As the months passed, Amelia and Daniel grew closer, their bond deepening with every adventure. They shared their fears, their dreams, and their hopes for the future. Daniel found peace in letting go of the past, while Amelia discovered a strength she never knew she had. One evening, as they watched the sunset from a hill overlooking a small coastal town, Daniel turned to her, his face serious. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady. "Maybe it's time we stop running. Maybe it's time we put down some roots." Amelia looked at him, her heart swelling with emotion. Where? Anywhere we want, Daniel replied. As long as we're together. Amelia smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. I like the sound of that. And so, they found a small house by the sea, a place where they could build a life that was theirs alone. It was a simple home, but it was filled with laughter, love, and a sense of belonging that they had both been searching for. Chapter 14, The Return. Years later, after they had built a life together, Amelia and Daniel decided it was time to visit Maplewood again. They had heard from friends that the town had changed, new faces, new places, but the same old charm. As they drove into town, memories flooded back, both good and bad. The streets felt narrower, the buildings smaller, but there was a warmth in the familiarity. They visited the old oak tree by the lake, the place where their journey had begun. The tree was still there, its branches reaching out like welcoming arms. They stood under its shade, holding hands, and took a deep breath of the crisp, cool air. It's good to be back, Daniel said softly, squeezing her hand. Yeah, Amelia agreed, smiling. But it's even better knowing we can always leave again. And they did, knowing that no matter where they went, they would always have each other. Chapter 15, The Whisper of New Beginnings. As Amelia and Daniel settled back into the rhythm of life in their seaside home, they found themselves drawn closer together by the experiences they had shared. The return to Maplewood had brought them full circle, but they knew their story was far from over. Life, they realized, was not about finding a single place to settle, it was about continually finding reasons to grow. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Amelia sat by the window with a notebook in her lap. She had taken up writing again, a hobby she'd abandoned long ago in the hustle of daily life. Now, with each stroke of her pen, she felt like she was uncovering pieces of herself that had been hidden for years. What are you working on? Daniel asked, coming up behind her. He placed a gentle kiss on the top of her head and peered over her shoulder. Just some thoughts, Amelia said with a smile, closing the notebook softly. About everything we've been through. About the people we've met, the places we've seen. I guess I'm trying to make sense of it all. Daniel nodded, his eyes thoughtful. I think you should share it, he said after a moment. With others. Our story might help someone else find their way. The idea lingered in Amelia's mind. Could she really share their story, the heartbreak, the loss, the rediscovery of love and purpose? It was a deeply personal journey, but she realized that stories have a way of connecting people, of reminding them that they're not alone. Chapter 16, A New Chapter in Their Journey. Amelia took Daniel's words to heart and began to write in earnest. She spent hours each day pouring her thoughts and memories onto the page, capturing the essence of their journey. She wrote about the mysteries they had uncovered, the dangers they had faced, and the healing they had found in each other's presence. Weeks turned into months, and soon enough, she had a manuscript, a memoir of sorts that chronicled their quest for truth and the road to finding themselves. She titled it, The Forgotten Promise. One day, with a mix of excitement and nervousness, she sent it off to a few publishers, not knowing what to expect. To her surprise, one of them wrote back within weeks, expressing interest in her work. The editor said it was a compelling story of resilience and redemption, a tale that needed to be told. Amelia couldn't believe it. They want to publish it, she whispered to Daniel one evening, her hands trembling with excitement. They actually want to publish my book. Daniel grinned widely, his eyes shining with pride. I knew they would. You have a gift, Amelia. And now the world gets to see it too. With his support, she embarked on a new adventure, a book tour that took them across the country. They traveled from city to city, speaking to crowds of people who resonated with their story. Some had faced their own battles, their own moments of doubt and fear, and Amelia's words gave them hope. Chapter 17, The Unexpected Meeting. During one of their book tour stops, they found themselves in a small, picturesque town that reminded them of Maplewood. After her talk, as the crowd began to disperse, a middle-aged woman approached Amelia. She had kind eyes and a soft smile, but there was a sadness in her demeanor. Your story moved me, the woman said, her voice thick with emotion. It reminded me of something I've been trying to forget for years. Amelia listened intently, sensing there was more to the woman's words. My name is Evelyn Carter, the woman continued. I'm from Maplewood too, originally. My family left years ago after my brother disappeared. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced at Daniel, who looked equally surprised. Your brother, she asked carefully. Yes, Evelyn said, her eyes watering. His name was Thomas. He was one of the boys who went missing around the same time your story takes place. I always wondered what happened to him. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't mentioned Thomas's name in her book, but she had heard whispers about the other boys who had vanished back then. It was a dark chapter in Maplewood's history that had never been fully explained. I'm so sorry, Amelia said gently. I can't imagine the pain you must have gone through. Evelyn nodded, wiping away a tear. Reading your book made me think that maybe it's time to go back. To see if there's anything left to discover, to finally get some closure. Amelia and Daniel exchanged a glance, and without needing to speak, they both knew what they had to do. Chapter 18, back to where it all began. A few weeks later, Amelia and Daniel found themselves back in Maplewood once again, this time with Evelyn by their side. The town hadn't changed much since their last visit, but there was a different energy in the air, a feeling that something significant was about to unfold. They decided to start their search at the library, the place where Amelia had first found the letter that sparked everything. Evelyn stood quietly in the corner, her eyes scanning the shelves as if searching for a ghost from her past. Do you think we'll find anything here? Daniel asked, his voice low. I don't know, Amelia replied, her fingers tracing the spines of old books. But it's as good a place as any to start. As they sifted through records and old newspapers, something caught Evelyn's eye, a faded photograph tucked between the pages of a local history book. She pulled it out and gasped softly. It's him, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's Thomas. Amelia and Daniel crowded around to look at the photograph. It was a black and white image of a group of boys, standing proudly in front of a local church. Evelyn's brother, Thomas, was among them, his face lit up with a carefree smile. But who are the others? Daniel asked, noticing the boys standing beside Thomas. And why is this picture here? They looked more closely and noticed a small note scrawled on the back of the photograph, St. Mark's Youth Group, summer of '88. Before everything changed. St. Mark's, Evelyn murmured. That's where Thomas used to go for his youth group meetings. Maybe someone there knows something. Chapter 19, The Old Church St. Mark's Church stood on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a tall iron fence and a canopy of old oak trees. The building was weathered, its bricks chipped and covered in ivy, but it still held an air of solemn dignity. As they approached, they were greeted by Father Matthew, an elderly priest who had served the community for decades. His face lit up with recognition when he saw Evelyn. Evelyn Carter, he said, his voice warm but tinged with sadness. It's been a long time, hasn't it? Evelyn nodded. Too long, Father. We're here because we need answers. About my brother, Thomas. And the other boys. The priest's face grew serious. I was afraid this day would come, he said softly. Come inside. There's something you need to see. Inside, the church was dimly lit, the scent of old wood and incense heavy in the air. Father Matthew led them to a small, dusty room at the back, where old records and photographs were stored. He rummaged through a box and pulled out a thick folder. These are the records from the youth group, he explained, handing the folder to Evelyn. I've kept them all these years, hoping someone would come looking. As Evelyn flipped through the pages, her hands trembled. There were more photographs, more names, boys who had gone missing, just like Thomas. It was clear now that their disappearances weren't isolated incidents, they were part of something much larger. What happened to them? Daniel asked, his voice low. Father Matthew sighed, his eyes clouded with regret. There were rumors back then. Dark things happening in the town, things the authorities didn't want to deal with. Some said the boys had run away, others that they'd been taken. But I always suspected there was something more sinister at play. Chapter 20, Uncovering the Truth. Determined to uncover the truth, they began piecing together the fragments of the story from the records Father Matthew had provided. They visited old locations mentioned in the documents, abandoned warehouses, forgotten fields on the outskirts of town, and even an old mine shaft that had been sealed off for decades. Each step brought them closer to the dark reality that had been hidden for years. The boys, including Thomas, had been caught up in a ring of criminal activities run by a powerful group in Maplewood. The group had silenced anyone who got too close, and when the boys had stumbled upon their operation, they had been forcibly taken away to protect their secret. The weight of their discovery hung heavy on them. They knew the names of some of the people involved, some of whom had faced justice in Daniel's father's case, but others were still free. Evelyn was devastated but also determined. She had come for closure, and now she had a new mission, to make sure those responsible faced justice, no matter how much time had passed. Chapter 21, Confronting the Shadows. With new evidence in hand, they went to the authorities, determined to reopen the cold cases. At first, there was resistance, a reluctance to dig up the past, but the weight of their findings was undeniable. The community was shaken as old wounds were reopened. The stories of the missing boys were revived, and there was a renewed push to find the remaining perpetrators. One by one, those who were involved in the sinister dealings of the past were brought in for questioning, and the web of deceit and cover-ups was finally unraveled. Evelyn watched as the people who had taken her brother away were held accountable. It didn't bring him back, but it gave her a sense of peace she had been searching for all these years. Chapter 22, Healing and Moving Forward. After the trials and the investigations concluded, the town of Maplewood began to heal. The community came together, acknowledging the mistakes of the past and committing to a brighter future. Evelyn decided to stay in Maplewood, at least for a while. She had reconnected with people from her past and felt that, for the first time in a long time, she had found a place where she could start anew. Amelia and Daniel, having helped bring closure to a painful chapter, felt the pull to continue their journey. But they knew they'd always have a home in Maplewood, a place where their story had begun and where it would always be welcome. One afternoon, as they prepared to leave the town once more, Evelyn came to see them off. She hugged Amelia tightly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for helping me find my brother. And for helping this town heal." Amelia smiled, her heart full. It was worth it. All of it. As they drove away, leaving Maplewood behind once again, Amelia looked at Daniel, her heart swelling with love and hope. "What do you think is next for us?" Daniel grinned, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "Anything we want. The world is ours, Amelia." And with that, they drove toward the horizon, ready to write the next chapter of their extraordinary journey together, one filled with love, discovery, and the promise of endless possibilities. Chapter 23, The Road of Uncertainty. Amelia and Daniel drove in silence for a while, each lost in thought as the familiar landscape of Maplewood slowly disappeared in the rearview mirror. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the rolling hills and dense forests. There was a certain finality to leaving the town again, knowing that they had made a difference but also leaving behind the comfort of what they knew. What if we're making a mistake? Amelia finally broke the silence, her voice soft but filled with doubt. Daniel glanced at her, his eyes filled with understanding. "We've faced a lot of mistakes together, Amelia. But the only real mistake would be not trusting ourselves to keep moving forward." Amelia nodded, absorbing his words. She knew he was right. They had come so far and discovered so much about themselves. They couldn't turn back now. "I suppose you're right," she said with a small smile. "So, what's the plan now?" "Well," Daniel said thoughtfully, "we could keep traveling, or we could take some time to think about what we really want next. We've spent so much time running from the past, maybe it's time to start planning for the future." Amelia looked out the window, watching as the landscape changed. She thought about all the people they'd met and the experiences they'd shared. "I'd like that," she said softly. "To start thinking about what's next for us." Chapter 24, Settling down and building up. After months of traveling and exploring new places, Amelia and Daniel found themselves drawn to a small coastal town. It wasn't far from where they had settled briefly before, but it had a charm that was all its own. The town was nestled against a rugged coastline, with quaint little houses painted in bright colors and a bustling harbor where fishing boats bobbed in the water. They rented a small cottage by the sea, a place that felt both temporary and like home. It was a simple life, but it was theirs. Daniel found work as a carpenter, putting his skills to use in restoring the old wooden homes that lined the streets, while Amelia continued to write. She started working on a new book, one that was less about the past and more about the future. She wrote about healing, hope, and the small, beautiful moments that made life worth living. One day, while taking a walk along the beach, Daniel stopped and picked up a piece of driftwood. He turned it over in his hands, inspecting it carefully. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking. I miss working with my hands. Really building something. What if we opened a little shop here? A place where I could make furniture and you could sell your books and maybe even have a small cafe?" Amelia's eyes lit up. "That sounds perfect," she said, her heart swelling with excitement. "A place where people can come, feel at home, and find a bit of peace." I'd love that. And so, they set to work. They found a small storefront on the main street that was in desperate need of some love. Over the next several months, they poured their hearts into the project, renovating the space, building shelves, and creating a cozy nook for a small cafe. Daniel's handcrafted furniture filled the shop, and Amelia's books lined the shelves, each one a testament to their journey. The townspeople were curious at first, but soon they became regulars. The shop became a gathering place, a hub of warmth and creativity. People would come in for a cup of coffee and stay for hours, lost in a book or chatting with Daniel about his latest project. Amelia and Daniel had created a community, a place that was both theirs and everyone else's. Chapter 25, The Unexpected Visitor. One quiet afternoon, as the sun streamed through the shop's front window, Amelia was restocking a shelf when she noticed a man standing outside, looking in. He was tall, with a weathered face and a long coat that looked like it had seen better days. He seemed hesitant, as if deciding whether to come inside. "Can I help you?" Amelia asked, stepping out from behind the counter with a welcoming smile. The man looked at her for a moment, his eyes weary but kind. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said in a deep, gravelly voice. "I heard about this place from a friend. Said it was a place for people looking to start over." Amelia nodded. "We like to think so. Everyone's welcome here." He smiled faintly and stepped inside, looking around at the cozy interior. His eyes fell on Daniel's woodworking corner, where a half-finished chair sat waiting for the next step. "You do all this?" he asked, nodding toward the pieces. Daniel looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "Yeah, all made by hand. You interested in furniture?" The man chuckled softly. "I used to be. Did some work back in the day. But that feels like a lifetime ago." There was something about the way he spoke that tugged at Amelia's curiosity. "What brings you here?" she asked gently. "If you don't mind me asking." The man hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "I'm looking for a place to stay for a while. Somewhere quiet, where I can figure things out." Amelia nodded, understanding more than he could know. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," she said. "This place has a way of helping people find what they're looking for." Chapter 26, A shared past. Over the next few days, the man, who introduced himself as Jack, became a regular at the shop. He would sit in the corner, sipping coffee and watching the world go by. He didn't say much, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and deliberate. One day, as they were closing up, Jack stayed behind to help Daniel with a heavy cabinet. As they worked, he started to open up. "I used to have a place like this," he said quietly. "A workshop. Built things with my hands, made a good life. But, things fell apart. I lost my way." Daniel listened, sensing there was more to the story. "What happened?" Jack sighed, wiping his hands on his coat. "I got caught up in some bad business. Made some enemies I couldn't shake. I left to protect the people I cared about, but in the end, it cost me everything." Amelia, who had been listening from behind the counter, felt a pang of sympathy. She knew what it was like to feel lost, to be searching for a way back to yourself. "You're not alone, Jack," she said softly. "We've all been there, in one way or another." Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thanks. That means a lot." Chapter 27, Bonds forged in trust. As weeks turned into months, Jack became more than just a regular customer. He became a friend, a part of their little community. He helped Daniel in the workshop, sharing his knowledge and experience, and he often sat with Amelia, talking about life, books, and the twists and turns that had brought them all together. One day, as they were closing up the shop, Jack pulled Daniel aside. "I've been thinking," he said. "You've given me a lot, more than I deserve. I'd like to give something back." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You don't owe us anything, Jack." "I know," Jack replied. "But I've got some connections. People who could help you expand this place, turn it into something even bigger. Maybe even open another location." Amelia, who had overheard the conversation, joined them. "That's a generous offer, Jack. But we're happy with what we've built here. It's not about getting bigger. It's about building something that lasts." Jack nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "I understand. Just know the offer stands. You've given me a second chance. I'd like to do the same for others." Chapter 28, a growing family. As the seasons changed, so did the little shop by the sea. It became a place where people came not just to buy furniture or books but to find connection, friendship, and sometimes even themselves. Amelia and Daniel's vision had grown beyond anything they'd imagined, but it was the people who made it special. One evening, after a busy day, Amelia and Daniel sat on the porch of their cottage, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Jack had gone out for a walk, and the air was filled with the sound of waves crashing against the shore. "You know," Daniel said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never imagined we'd end up here. But I'm glad we did." Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder, a content smile on her lips. "Me too. It feels like we've built more than just a shop. We've built a family." Daniel nodded, wrapping an arm around her. "A family that keeps growing." As they sat there, the future felt full of promise. There were still challenges to face, but they knew they would face them together, with the strength and love that had brought them this far. Chapter 29, A surprise awaits. One morning, several months later, a letter arrived at the shop. It was addressed to Amelia and Daniel, with no return address. Curious, they opened it together. The letter was from Evelyn, back in Maplewood. She wrote about how the town was healing, how the community had come together in ways she never thought possible. But there was something else, something unexpected. "I found something," she wrote. "A diary. It belonged to one of the boys who went missing, the ones you helped bring justice for. There's a passage in it that mentions a place by the sea where he dreamed of going. It sounds a lot like where you are now." Amelia and Daniel exchanged a look, their hearts pounding with anticipation. Could it be a coincidence, or was there more to this connection than they had realized? Evelyn's letter continued, urging them to look for a marker, a small cairn of stones that might be hidden somewhere along the coast near their town. "I have a feeling," she wrote, "that there's more to this story. And you two are the ones to uncover it." Chapter 30, The Hidden Marker. Over the next few days, Amelia, Daniel, and Jack scoured the coastline, looking for the cairn of stones mentioned in Evelyn's letter. It was like searching for a needle in a haystack, but they were driven by a sense of purpose. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the rocks, Daniel spotted something. "Over here," he called out, waving them over. Amelia and Jack hurried to his side, and there it was, a small cairn of stones, carefully stacked in a secluded cove. Beneath the stones, they found a small, rusted tin box. Daniel pried it open, revealing a collection of faded photographs, letters, and a small journal. As they flipped through the pages, they realized it belonged to one of the missing boys, just as Evelyn had suggested. The entries spoke of friendship, adventure, and a desire to escape to a place where they could be free, where they could be themselves. Tears filled Amelia's eyes as she read the words. "This was their dream," she whispered. "To find a place like this. To be safe. To be free." Jack placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with emotion. "Looks like you've made that dream come true." Chapter 31, Honoring the Past, Embracing the Future. With the discovery of the journal, the story of the boys from Maplewood came full circle. Amelia and Daniel decided to honor their memory by creating a special space in their shop, a place where people could come to reflect, to remember, and to find hope. They built a small memorial garden outside the shop, a peaceful spot overlooking the sea, where the stories of the lost boys could live on. It became a place where people could leave messages, flowers, and stones, each one a testament to the enduring power of love, resilience, and the human spirit. As the garden grew, so did the sense of community. People came from all over, drawn by the story and the hope it inspired. The shop by the sea had become more than a business, it had become a beacon, a place of healing, belonging, and new beginnings. And through it all, Amelia and Daniel stood side by side, knowing that their journey was far from over, but confident that whatever came next, they would face it together. The end, or perhaps, just another beginning.